Joining me on the program now from Pillar is Nathan Yuli. Nathan, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks, Andrew.
This is a bit worrying. Now, I know you're all about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and sometimes that does involve a protest march. Sometimes that does involve a pithy slogan which rhymes. Perhaps a placard or two. But there is perhaps not a huge gap between a protest and a riot. This is a concerning study that's come out.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's really important to point out that 1 in 7 Kiwis who believe that we may have to take up violence to get our country back on track, whatever that means,
Yep.
getting our country back on track. I know some people were pretty quick to politicize it based on different party leanings, with Te Pāti Māori showing 1 in 4, but ACT was right there with 1 in 5.
Yep.
So it's indicative of a broad problem. It's indicative of it being across the political divide, that people are starting to lose faith in democracy, which is alive and well and active in my view, but it's not being properly utilized. So, yeah, look, I think we can trace this problem back to our institutions. We can trace this problem back to our education. We can trace it back to our media in some regards as well. But what we can't do is allow this to become the norm, allow this to become acceptable, where people are quick to take up violence, but very slow to take up voting, as we saw with local elections.
Yeah, exactly. And interesting to see that in a political context, because, you know, this percentage of Te Pāti Māori or Te Pāti's Māori, as would be more accurate at the moment, and ACT Party, but essentially what these people are saying is we're not trusting the politicians, even those parties that we would associate ourselves with. They're not going to get the job done. We need to take this into our own hands. This is very worrying that, hey, if the politicians aren't going to do it, then, you know, torch and pitchfork kind of stuff, isn't it?
Oh, exactly. I think one thing that really stood out to me in the recent news of Jim Bolger passing away was Winston Peters made some statements about how he was the last New Zealand Prime Minister to serve without a university degree. And I think that it's an interesting take, but what it actually is, I think, for me, is indicative of who's representing us in Parliament. I think a lot of Kiwis don't feel represented. I think there is a disconnect there between, even though they're elected officials, there is a disconnect that once they're in office, they're not representative of everyday Kiwis' views. So it's really not a surprise in some senses that people are starting to take matters into their own hands, or feel like if push came to shove, they'd be very happy to shove back.
Yeah.
I think we need Kiwis to be more active in democracy. We need people to show up and turn out and vote. And it's not, but what we're seeing is it's not an issue of accessibility. The reason low voter turnout happened with the local election, for example, was not accessibility. It was an issue of value. So people are not feeling represented. They're not feeling like the issues they care about are being put forward, and they're stopping from going to the polling booths, and they're actually starting to head to the streets for what you talked about, which is protests, civil unrest, and strikes. So yeah, it's really concerning.
And I think perhaps more people would vote if they thought it would make a difference. If they thought that their particular form of politics would have the influence that it needed to put in place real policies that would make a positive difference on their lives. But honestly, we're not necessarily seeing that. Having said that, Nathan, I can't think of a point in history where a riot and a revolution has had good outcomes for the people that thought that they were changing the world to make it a better place.
I mean, yeah, it depends who you talk to about that. I think there's a place in democracy for protest.
Yep.
We would never endorse at Pillar violent protest, but civil unrest is definitely called upon when the system is turned against the citizens. What I think, though, is that the world over, democracy is still the best system. There hasn't been a better system, and no one would argue in their right mind that democracy was perfect. It isn't perfect. I think there's this real cognitive dissonance where people haven't realized when they've arrived. And a really good way to put it is, look how many people are trying to immigrate to New Zealand. We just announced the parent visas, and we were inundated with applications. We have a huge percentage of people trying to come to New Zealand. That's not a mistake, and that's not by accident. New Zealand is an amazing country. We have an amazing system and an amazing society. When we fail to recognize that, defend that, and fight for that, that's when we start to lose it. So I think that people who are in this fantasy land in their own head, heads where there's a better system somewhere or there's better outcomes somewhere, what that is an avoidance of responsibility. That democracy is the best system that exists, we
Yep.
know, but it only works for you when you work for it, when you get involved and you participate and you take responsibility. There's this idea that we haven't arrived yet. We've absolutely arrived. We live in the greatest time in history, but are we going to take the responsibility that comes with the beauty and the provision that comes with effectively democracy? Because it doesn't happen by accident. It's not a mistake. We have to work for it. But I don't know if people are acknowledging that.
Part of the problem also seems to be the response from the politicians. Now, as I say, industrial action later in the week. We had an open letter from Judith Collins over the weekend, basically throwing a bit of shade at people who have a right to take industrial action when their collective bargaining has fallen over. We've had a certain amount of pushback from the health minister as well in this regard. Perhaps strikes don't make the difference, but snide comments and sarcasm from our politicians certainly isn't doing the world a whole bunch of favours either. We go back a couple of years and we had collectively Parliament refusing to recognise a mass protest outside Parliament houses. The protesters described as a river of filth, and Finance Minister saying these people have lost the right to protest. It's perhaps understandable that a section of our society has contempt for our politicians when these and other examples of our politicians having contempt for the people that they were elected to serve.
Absolutely. And these are not these are middle to upper class people who are feeling a real disconnect from what would be considered middle to upper class people as well. So this is not a class-based issue. This is the issue of values, I think. And I can understand the working conditions for our medical professionals are not ideal. But if you want to be employed by the state, you are at the whim of the state in a sense as well. I think that there has to be some real discussion around how our health system works, the consolidation of all the DHBs into a national health system and all these things. We're still having the effects of what was a fairly unsuccessful merger. They're trying to undo this and unpick this. But unfortunately, it's sort of been welded together with a lot of poorly written and drafted processes and systems. So I understand exactly why there's a lot of tension and frustration within the health system on both ends, from the government and from those who operate in there. This is not going to be an overnight fix. I don't think it's as simple as pay them more money, get better results. There needs to be a two-way approach, top and bottom, of bringing systems and solutions in that clarify and speed up processes, and recognizing the really important work that our health professionals do. I was just talking to someone over the weekend who works for a health sort of sector and asking why we don't nationally fund at 100% St. John's ambulances. It just seems like something that I would have thought we did, but it's not 100% funded. So there's all these issues that we need to work through. We need to recognize the individuals in play here, and we also need to recognize better systems and processes from our government and for the health system, because we are at breaking point. We're really, really close to people being seriously and critically affected by ineffectiveness within the system.
Yeah, and hey, not only if systems collapse, there will be protests, but also if protests themselves don't seem to have an effect, if the politicians don't seem to be listening, then it's perhaps in that context understandable why people say, hey, if that doesn't work, maybe we will take it to the next level, which is frightening stuff to hear about our lovely piece of paradise at the bottom of the South Pacific. Nathan, thank you so much for the work that you do at Pillar. If people wanted to find out more about your organisation and the things that it stands for, what's the best way of connecting?
www.nzpillar.com is our website. Everything's there, and we're on every social media platform at pillar_NZ. So come check us out.
Nathan, thanks for what you do. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.